Hello and welcome to another episode of Craig Biddle Live. Since the last episode, I received a couple of questions on the issue of value hierarchies and how to establish them. And I'd like to address that today along with some related ideas and principles. This is a big subject, so what I'm going to do is today I'm going to talk about what these things are and why they're important. And then in a future episode, I'll talk about how to use the tools that we've talked about today to establish and pursue values in accordance with one's value hierarchy. So we're going to break this up a little bit. Now, the first thing to bear in mind when we start talking about value hierarchies is what's the goal here? What are we trying to do? And in this case, this is sort of an all-encompassing goal. We're talking about the values in your life and how to organize them and pursue them. And so we want to know why we're doing this. And the ultimate goal here is a lifetime of happiness. So I'm assuming the ultimate end of the morality of egoism here. If anyone watching is unfamiliar with that idea, you can run a search on Ayn Rand's morality or the objectivist ethics or anything along those lines, and you can read up on that. But my assumption today is that we're after a lifetime of happiness, and the purpose of establishing a hierarchy of values and using the tools I'm going to talk about today is precisely to pursue and achieve that. So in order to talk about hierarchy of values, we need to get very clear on what values are. So we're going to begin there. Values are the objects of actions. They're the things that we act to gain or keep, as Ayn Rand aptly defined it. And they're really the stuff of life. We pursue values in order to live, and the pursuit of values is what makes life meaningful. So whether it's your career or your relationships or recreational activities or a summer home or a good night's sleep, any of these things are values, and they are values precisely because you act to gain or keep them and they serve your life. Now, there are illegitimate values, things that people act to gain or keep that are contrary to the requirements of life. We're going to set those aside and just make the assumption today that we're talking about legitimate values, values that are that are consonant with the objective standard of value, which is the requirements of human life. Now, there are essentially two different kinds of legitimate values. There are universal values. Those are the values that all human beings need in order to live. So these are things like reason, purpose, freedom, self-esteem, and most of these are psychological values or values of consciousness or spiritual values. And these are the values that enable us to pursue other values, such as the typical values that are thought of as the absolute necessity, food, shelter, etc. But also all of the more subtle and more intricate spiritual values that make our lives wonderful. So various relationships and the purposes that we choose in life. So we use our mind and we use our mental faculties to decide the actions that we're going to take and the goals that we're going to pursue. So those are universal values, things that everyone needs in order to live. And then there are personal values, and those are values that are within the scope, if they're rational personal values, they're within the scope or the range of the universal values, but they're specific to your own life and needs and desires. So these are things like your chosen career, your chosen recreational activities, if you love sailing and if you love accounting or if you love painting, the things that you pursue that are specific to your life based on your own choices that are not necessarily universal. Not everyone needs to enjoy surfing, but if that's something that adds value to your life, and it genuinely does, it's a good solid value, then that's the realm of personal values. So they're universal and they're personal. And both of these matter when we start talking about establishing a hierarchy of values to help guide your thinking and your actions in life. Now, if values are the stuff of life, time is the currency of life. And Ayn Rand has a beautiful analogy about this in her book, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, where she talks about the fact that money is the currency in the realm of economics. And in life, more broadly, the currency is time. It's something that's of limited quantity. We only have but so much. And we spend it. And we can either spend it wisely or we can spend it foolishly. We can spend it in a way that advances our life, that we've thought out clearly about what we want and how to spend our time, or we can fritter our time away and have that kind of life. So if we want to fill our lives with joy, and if we want to maximize flourishing, then we need to take values seriously, and we need to take our time seriously. And these elements are what give rise to the need of a hierarchy of values. And a hierarchy of values is simply a way of organizing your values with respect to their relative importance. So their importance relative to your overarching goal, which is a lifetime of happiness, and their relative importance to each other. Life is complex, and there are a lot of values out there. And if we don't decide carefully which ones we want to pursue and then organize our lives in a way that we can really go after the ones that are most important to us and achieve them, then we're going to just live a less than ideal life. And there's no reason to do that because there's a means of living a fabulous life. And so that's what this is all about, establishing a hierarchy of values. Now let's talk a little bit about the nature of a hierarchy of values. So it can sound as though this is linear. There's one thing at the top, and then there are these other things, and they're all, each ladder down is a lesser value relative to the ones above it. And I think that's a false way to look at this. Hierarchy of values doesn't mean that every value is necessarily second to some other set of values. Some values are equally important. And so I think, I mean, your lover and your career are in a sense, they're so different that it's almost ridiculous to compare them. But they're reciprocal. You have a relationship with someone you love, and you certainly would do anything in the world for that person, including perhaps, having to give up a career if that were the case. Not for her desires, but let's say, if something happened to her that precluded you from being able to pursue the career that you wanted, and you wanted to take care of her, then there's an argument to be made that these are not values that you would say that the career is more important no matter what than this person, nor vice versa. So I think you want to consider values as being integral in your life, and in many ways reciprocal in the way that they support each other. Now obviously your career or your job, however you generate income for yourself, is one of the most important values in your life, because it's what affords the time that you have to pursue all of your other values, whether recreational activities or friendships or what have you. So there's a sense in which your career, or what Ayn Rand called your central purpose, and that's actually a little bit broader than your career, because that's sort of the overarching umbrella of what you're trying to do professionally in your life. And different careers could come in under that. Several careers could. But the point is that you definitely have an overarching value in your career, which includes your job or your income source, that affords you to do all of the other things that you want to do in life, and that is extremely important. So that's a key element of your hierarchy of values. Your recreational pursuits, your health, taking care of yourself both mentally and physically, are elements that belong in a hierarchy of values. The people you want to spend your time with, the people you spend your time with make a huge difference in your life. They're enormous values, so you want to be careful to spend your time with people who really add value to your life. Obviously, your romantic relationships are of supreme importance. If you have children, they're enormously important, and so on. So these are all values that are specific to your life. And once you know what things you want essentially involved in your life, if you can organize them in a way, to some extent hierarchically and to some extent side by side, but organize them in a way that enables you to say, if I pursue this value, spending this much time on it, that will afford me time to pursue these other values, spending this much time on them, which will enable me to create this kind of life, which is the life that I want to design. But designing a life like that really does take thought. If you just haphazardly take actions in life, you're not going to maximize your flourishing. If you think carefully about what your values are, that helps you to push away the things that you don't want to spend time on, the things you don't want to pursue. If you find yourself watching hours of television, but dreaming about how much you'd love to have a black belt in karate or learn ballroom dancing or learn to play the flute, you're doing yourself a great disservice. I mean, you want to decide, what are the things that really matter? What should I really spend my time on? Get those onto your hierarchy of values, and then start taking action to achieve those things. Now, if you don't think about, if you never plan out your hierarchy of values, if you don't have any established hierarchy, then you have no way of actually making value calculations. You just literally are just moving from one thing to the next at random without an integrated thought system behind it. So establishing your hierarchy of values is extremely important. Now, there are two different kinds of hierarchy of values, and we're going to talk about one today and another one in the next episode. There's your actual hierarchy of values, and those are the values that you are actually pursuing in life, whether they're the ones you want to be pursuing or not. If the values are the things you act to gain or keep, then if you look back over your last month and say, what have I been doing? What have I been acting to gain and keep? Those are de facto your values. That's what you value in the sense that values are the things you act to gain or keep. But then there's your desired hierarchy of values, what you want your life to be. And that's what I'm talking about today when I'm talking about trying to organize your values in terms of the life you want to live and the hierarchical importance of those values and their interrelationships. Once you have that to some extent organized, and these things change over time, obviously. I mean, your career could change. That changes your hierarchy of values. Your recreational activities that you enjoy could change. You might have children. You might get married. So these things are to some extent fluid, but you can only make good decisions about what actions to take in life at any given time if you're aware of what you want and what your hierarchy of values is at that time. So it's important to establish this and then to keep changing it or updating it as your life requires. Once you do have this hierarchy, then you can engage in what Ayn Rand called teleological measurements. And teleological measurements just means measurements with respect to the goals that you have in life. Telos means end or goal. So a teleological measurement is a goal-directed measurement. And the way I like to think of this is it's effectively the math of egoism. Other sciences, such as physics, engage in measurements or involve measurements in terms of mathematical measurements, weights and numbers and things like that. And in ethics, the measurement is made in terms of telos, in terms of goals and ends that you're trying to achieve. And you make a teleological measurement or calculation with respect to your values by looking at or being aware of what's most important to you and what's less important to you. And that enables you to make precise value calculations or precise calculations about what actions you should take in life to make your life the best it can be. And the hierarchy of values, once established, enables you to engage in these kinds of calculations. And I call this the math of egoism. And math I put in quotes because it's not literally math. What you're doing here is there's mathematical measurement and there's teleological measurement. And a teleological measurement is basically a measurement with respect to the order of importance of your values. But they're no less precise. These kinds of measurements, once you have your value hierarchy organized, can be literally as precise as the kinds of measurements that are taken in other sciences or kinds of measurements that are made in other sciences. But in order to get to the point where you can make those kinds of measurements, you have to think, you have to do the thinking to organize your values in a way that's exactly the kind of life that at this time you are aiming to achieve through your actions. And once you have that, then you can engage in the math of egoism. One final element of the math of egoism is the principle of non-sacrifice, and that is basically the negative form of the principle of value hierarchy. The principle of value hierarchy holds that you should establish your hierarchy of values and pursue your values accordingly. And the principle of non-sacrifice says you should not sacrifice a greater value for the sake of a lesser value. And this again shows the preciseness that you can achieve when you think about ethics or egoism in terms of a science. You can think of it this way. The law of non-contradiction, a thing cannot be A and non-A at the same time, is to facts what the law of non-sacrifice is to values. All right, so the law of non-contradiction is the negative form of the law of identity. A is A. And that means that A cannot be non-A at the same time and in the same respect. And so if you think that something is A and non-A, you've made an error. You've committed a contradiction. Well, the same is true in a value hierarchy once you have it established. If you think about this in terms of the plateau and the slope that I've been talking about, once you have a plateau of your hierarchy of values, and then you have the law of excluded middle, the terminus of that plateau, and then a slope, the slope represents what? The violations of that hierarchy, the sacrifices in this case. And so this is what you should be doing once it's established, and these are the degrees of errors that are possible. And the goal, of course, to live a wonderful life and maximize your flourishing is to stay on the plateau. So I hope you find these tools helpful. This is just another set of ideas and principles that you can embrace and use in the way in thinking about value pursuits and in thinking about a life of freedom and flourishing, which is what we want. In a future episode, I'll dive deeper into how to use some of these tools to actually establish and pursue values with respect to these tools. But today I just wanted to introduce these ideas and give you an indication of what they are and why I think they're important and why I think you might find them useful if you start putting them to work. So thanks for joining me today. We'll gather next week. I'm going to do an episode, I think, pertaining to Thanksgiving. And I'll send out a notice about that soon. And perhaps the week after that, we'll return to this subject and talk more about hierarchies of values and how to use these tools. Until next week, love your life, pursue your values, and accept no contradictions. Cheers.